Hello there and good afternoon from the United Kingdom. This is your host, Ali Hagbayan from Aries Media Network. Today is the 1st of April 2023. The time is currently 7:07 p.m. And today, our topic, which we're going to be discussing, is going to be the depopulation agenda. Now, we'll be touching on a few subjects like the WEF, like the Georgia Guidestones, and disease and, health in general, in regards to the whole depopulation agenda that we have set for us by, I believe, 2030. It is extremely important that we start to look at these things very closely. It is very, very vital that these things aren't overlooked. The information that which is being presented is at least looked into. All we ask is for a moment of clarity and critical thinking, and for you to take a second out of your day to have a look at what we're trying to explain, what we're trying to actually put across to you, and just take into consideration why, for one, some of us might make it our obligation to take time out of our spare, time to ourselves and actually start producing content which can start provoking thought in people around the world, in the UK, and in all the countries which I'm able to reach and people are able to understand me. Unfortunately, we have a limited reach, as I'm currently just a channel that's starting out and a podcast that's starting out, and I look forward to being able to offer raw, uncensored, unbiased and unfiltered truth to the masses. Now, first we're going to begin with the Georgia Guidestones. I'm not sure if anybody is aware of the Georgia Guidestones and what they are, but they were a monument essentially that was erected in the United States. And the Georgia Guidestones, in specifically related to depopulation, were actually, inscripted in several languages. And a part of what was inscribed on these giant megalithic sized stone blocks was that of a population agenda, and in specific it was mentioned how by the year 2030 it would be ideal to reduce the world's population from the current, I think, 7.8 billion or so that we're at, down to around 500 million in population. Now, this is a very drastic change in population. This is something that could definitely not happen without wide-scale, implications. So it begs to question what exactly these people have in store for us, the average human being, and what we have coming in our potential future that threatens the fact that our population could see a potential anywhere from 85 to 95% reduction. Now, personally, I believe that the people at the top of the food chain, the elites, the so-called Bill Gates, the Klaus Schwabs, the Rockefellers, the Rothschild, the Soros of the world have came to the conclusion after meticulous planning and thinking that essentially, regardless of how much resources they've gathered, regardless of how much money and fiscal access they have, it's going to come to a certain point where resources, food, water, shelter, things like that are going to be so scarce that no matter what anybody is willing to offer you, if you have access to any of those resources, not necessarily all of them, but just one, then ideally and highly likely you're probably not going to want to give any of your resources away, especially in a time where, you know, people of that status are wanting to buy from you your resources to be able to survive. Then clearly your resources are more valuable to both you and them than the monetary value and return that you'd be getting in return for any of that. So I believe they've came to the conclusion that their only option to go forward into the future would be to depopulate and decrease the human population size, simply to allow the scarcity of the resources that we're currently heading towards to roll backwards, so that there's not as many people to, you know, for it to be distributed across, essentially, in essence, and effectively fixing and solving their problem. Personally, I believe that this is the case. This is why things like cancers, Ebolas, AIDS, things I consider to be man-made and genetically engineered diseases and illnesses and ailments will continue to stay rampant, and we will continue to, you know, donate and provide taxpayer funding and whatever to all this research, and I believe that no actual valuable result will come of any of this, as this is clearly an agenda that which they need to maintain in order for them to survive, and in order for the medical industry, the healthcare industry to be able to thrive, is that they need to make sure people are constantly sick. I'm sure you've heard the analogy before where obviously if I'm a doctor, although I am here and responsible to take care of my fellow human beings and make sure that you stay fully healthy, and I can, you know, do to the best of my ability what I can to ensure that. However, it is also important that I don't rob myself of a job. So, for example, if you come in with an ailment which I know I could cure in potentially a week, which would net me in profits, let's say £1,000, over the choice of having you come back for the next 30 years of your life being on a repeat prescription, which not only benefits me, but then also benefits the pharmaceutical company which is attached to the medication which is being prescribed repeatedly. In return, building massive amounts of money, generating capabilities for these companies, for these individuals to be able to pocket quite a large sum of profits yearly, in fact, and some of them even monthly. Now, if you take a look at this and consider all of this when looking at people like Klaus Schwab at the World Economic Forum, speaking about how humans in the future will essentially own nothing and be happy about it, and everything will be rented, and your carbon footprint, as they put it, will be recorded and tracked, so that, you know, they can ensure every human is doing their bit. Which would essentially put us across to a social credit system like they have currently going on in China, which we all know which isn't exactly the best idea currently for us, or at least we're trying to avoid that anyway. So in order to make sure none of this happens, it is extremely vital. This type of information, this type of research is definitely carried out even by the individuals at home, the people who tend to be on their 9-to-5s and stuck in their bubbles and don't actually get time to, you know, venture outside of their heads and their little bubbles and be able to soak in and have a look what's actually taking place globally, the current structure of the world, the risk of war, the famine, the poverty, the crashing dollar, the economic collapse, which we're more than definitely headed towards. All of this, I believe, definitely reflects the whole the whole reduction and downsizing of the human population, which the Georgia Guidestones is referencing. Earlier on today, actually, I was watching a video in regards to Deagle.com. Essentially, it's a site which holds data regarding all the countries in the world, and this person had actually accessed this site a little while back, I believe in 2017 or so, or 2020, one of the two, and actually recorded themselves accessing the population forecasts and the population at that point, which was 2017, on Deagle.com, which returned the United Kingdom, for example, at that time having 66 million in population, which then forecast by 2025, as he scrolled down, reduced all the way down to 15 million in population, which is a massive, almost 50 million people that have been lost or dead, or you couldn't possibly explain any of this as potential migratory reasons, and that could be the reason as to why there's such a reduction in the population in places like the UK. The guy actually went on to show countries like the US, which was, I believe, 350 or so million in population, which they plan to reduce to 100 million. So a whole 250 million people reduction and reduced by 2025. So that's not too far away, folks. That's literally 2 years away. And looking at the climate of the world we're in right now, looking at the banks shutting down, the world trying to sway away from the US dollar and trying to end and choke out the end and what's left of the petrodollar, is very, very scary for someone like me who's done the research, and I fully understand, especially with this whole depopulation stuff, what they're planning on doing in regards to the 2025 deadline which they've set for themselves. The page I was talking about, by the way, on Deagle.com has actually been removed. I was looking for it previously today to see if I could actually pop some images from it onto the screen above, but it was actually not available, unfortunately, so I had to have a little look around, and unfortunately I wasn't able to find anything in relation to that other than the video itself, which I didn't want to use for copyright reasons. But essentially the top and bottom of it with the depopulation agenda is the whole resource scarcity, the fact that they've realized now that no matter how much fiscal means they have and access they have, that it's going to come to a point where there's so many in population that it's literally not going to matter, because whoever does have the resources aren't going to be willing to give them up no matter what you offer up to them. And then on the other hand, the profitability of it through the medical and healthcare industry, the fact that it would benefit them massively if there was far, far less humans asking questions. They would be far easier to control, far easier to guide, far, far easier to mislead, and far easier to control. So the red line here right now is to essentially see a point and a flashpoint which is going to be created, which no doubt is definitely going to come in the next 2 years if this forecast has any ounce of truth to it, which again is extremely scary for the average person. All I can do is urge everybody to go out there and research these topics by themselves. I've made sure to cover the World Economic Forum, Mr. Klaus Schwab, the Depopulation Agenda, the Georgia Guidestones, the disease and healthcare side of everything, the man-made diseases, everything, all the food, all the 35% rates of cancer in developing countries, everything is all tied into the depopulation agenda, tied into weakening humanity, tied into trying to gain more control, tied into making it far, far easier for them to do so simply by getting rid of as many people as they can. And as much as I hate to say it, folks, looking at the numbers, especially what I was viewing on this video by this gentleman, making an example from Deagle.com, by the looks of it, the only way they could get rid of such a vast amount of the population, the figures which they've shown seems to be the same figures of people who, ended up taking the you-know-what in between lockdown periods since coronavirus began. Now, looking at the adverse effects that people have been having, I wouldn't place it too far-fetched to think that that could be the result in a lot of people's deaths. And if we start seeing mass casualties and deaths, then we know exactly what to start looking at. Personally, I've not had anything along those lines. I made sure I did not partake whilst we were going through that hellish time. But those who did, I seriously and sincerely ask you to do some research and have a look into what we could be heading into and what could potentially be in the future for you. This is a serious matter. It's not something to be joking with. I advise you all to look into it, have a think about what could be done, what you could do, if you could do any type of prepping for anything that is to come in the future. The most that could happen is you try and make, some type of preemptive, preparement in storing food or storing clothing items or a bug out bag or anything to be able to survive if things were to go mess and tits up within a 24-hour notice. Then definitely do so. The only thing you could miss out on is maybe a couple of £100 and some wasted time and some food which will rot eventually because you've hopefully not had to use it. Now, I urge you all to definitely go and do your own research. Make sure that the topics which I've mentioned you have a little look into. It's just a little bit of food for thought. I'm going to keep these episodes as short as I can relatively before we start heading into hour-long episodes and inviting guests on to have a little chat so we can start getting more than one opinion and perspective on these things to see whether I'm just crazy or these dots which I see constantly being connected in front of me are definitely something worth being worried about, which warrants and justifies my need to have to take time out of my day and create content like this to try and provoke the thought and critical thinking in others. I thank you for listening to me today. This is your host, Ali Hagbayan, representing Aries Media Network. Today's date is the 1st of April, 2023. The time is currently 7:25 p.m. and this is the end of the podcast. Over and out.